Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 358. It's a special Gimmel Tammuz edition. We all wish that this day had not happened 27 years ago. Yes, the Gimmel Tammuz of the Did the Rebbe's beginning of his redemption led to the full redemption in Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz. There's the Gimmel Tammuz that happened in the time of Yeshua when the sun stopped. But the Gimmel Tammuz in our generation, where the sun stopped, Pnei Moshe ke Pnei Chama, the face of Moshe of the generation is like the face of the sun, and has not yet revealed itself as the Aschalt of Geula in a revealed way, the Geula Amitis Vashlema. So, of course, it's quite a sad day on one hand. On the other hand, we were trained and taught by the Rebbe that sadness is never an end in itself. It has to be a catalyst for growth and even more intensified efforts in fulfilling the Rebbe's mandate that he had given us. So that's really the power of Gimmel Tammuz. Hazerim b'dima berinu yuktzeru, which means that those that sow with tears will reap with joy. So if there are tears, and there should be, they're not an end in itself. They're like to water and irrigate the garden, basiligani, in order to create even more growth and, frankly, more responsibility that we carry now to be the Rebbe's arms and legs and the Rebbe's ambassadors and shluchim and shluchis to bring the message of Torah, Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Neach, and everything that godliness represents to every corner of the world, any person we can reach. And that's ultimately the real calling of Gimmel Tammuz. So yes, we can sit and debate and argue and discuss why it happened and what it means, but the Rebbe always wanted action. The action is, what does it mean, and what are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? How many times, and without a fail, every time there was anything, a tragedy, a loss, it always ended up becoming, from the Rebbe's point of view, how is that going to motivate us to become better, to create better activities, to reach more people, and with that positive attitude. The Rebbe was never in the context of being a victim. We're never victims of circumstances. We make things happen. We don't just watch things happen, and we don't just stand on the sidelines and throw our arms up and say, what are we going to do? The Rebbe quotes the Did the Rebbe as saying that at the end of Masechta Seita, you have the negative simonim, what will be in Ikvus the Mashiach at the end of days. And then the Gemara concludes, Ve'ein lanu liyishoyin ela al avinu shebashamayim. People will say, we have nothing else to rely on but our Father in heaven. So it sounds like a blessing that after all the problems, we'll be completely in a state where we can't do anything but rely on God. And the Did the Rebbe says that itself is part of the negative signs of the end of days. That instead of doing something, we'll just throw up our hands and say, what can we do? It's so bad, there's nothing we can do. That has never been an approach in Torah. That's never an approach of Chassidus. When the Jews were stuck between a rock and a hard place, the Egyptians pursuing them, and the sea before them, and they broke into 4 different camps. One said, let's go to war. One said, let's pray. One said, let's jump into the sea. The other said, let's return to Egypt. All of them were rejected. Vayiso, one word, move forward. You were told that you're going to Har Sinai, Is Yechi HaMelech, Tavdin Salakim ala Har Hazeh. When you will leave Egypt, you're going towards serving me at Mount Sinai, receiving the Torah. Same thing here. We were told we're going to the Geula. The Rebbe made it clear 70 years ago in Basiligani, Tovshin Yud Aleph. We're the 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe. We will finish the job and reach the finish line. Has it been easy? Have there been setbacks? Have there been challenges? Absolutely. But Vayiso, one word. We must move ahead and forge ahead. That to me is the theme of Gimmel Tammuz. To not look distracted by all the questions and the dilemmas and the darkness and the concealments, but to forge ahead with more intensity than ever, precisely because we don't have answers. And precisely we can get so easily paralyzed and break into 4 groups. Should we go to war? Should we pray? Should we resign ourselves and surrender? Should we throw ourselves into the sea? So precisely because of those options, we need to take that 5th and only option, Vayiso, move forward. And we were promised, do what you have to do, and the Geula will come. And the Rebbe said that in 1991 in the classic sicha 30 years ago, Chof Nissan. Essentially reiterating some of the points he made Purim Tavshmem Zayin 4 years earlier. Tut alles was again, do everything you can. I did what I can. Now you have to do what you can. Of course, with the Rebbe's keiches. This encapsulates the Gimmel Tammuz message. I received many questions. I can't do them all. I would love to. So I've summed them up and tried to consolidate them and address questions regarding to Gimmel Tammuz. And we will also talk about Pasha Chukas, which is this week, and some other themes that are related to all of that. But with the focus is Gimmel Tammuz. Gimmel Tammuz is the day 27 years ago when the Rebbe's neshama went upward, and people like on our level, the Einei Basa, with our flesh, eyes of flesh and blood, there we do not see the Rebbe. So it has significance. I personally was inspired and ignited. I would not be doing this program. I would not be doing anything I'm doing, frankly, today, were not that inspiration. So, of course, it has personal nature, but it also has collective nature, because the Rebbe wasn't just a Rebbe for one individual, it was a Rebbe for the world, a Rebbe that God sent to this world on a mission to teach us what our mission is. And to suggest that Gimmel Tammuz is an end is absolutely incorrect. Is it a Nissan, a challenge, a test? Yes. But that's why we come together and we intensify and we strengthen our bond and we strengthen each other in this journey, in the Vayiso of forging ahead, unwavering, with even more strength than before. So here are some questions that came my way, and I again appreciate everybody's vote of confidence. First of all, sharing your questions. Some of the questions are very sensitive. Some, frankly, are written in ways that some may consider irreverent, but as I've always said, I want to hear people, I want to hear their voice, I want to be able to address it, and I'll point out if I think sometimes the language should be a little different, but we all are entitled to be who we are, and we learn and we grow how to become more sensitive when we talk about the Rebbe and about Gimmel Tammuz. But it's understandable that people have many questions, and not everybody understands all the dimensions, and none of us understand all the dimensions of what a Rebbe is, what godliness is, and definitely the bigger plan, and especially so many that were born after 27 years ago. People who were born even 30 years ago would probably barely remember the Rebbe, but 27 is a whole generation of people born after Gimmel Tammuz. So I deliberately and encourage, and more than encourage, I can't say demand, but any possible way to get your questions, because the most important thing is to engage, to talk, to discuss. Questions, answers. That means you're involved. A person who becomes apathetic and doesn't even ask questions, either because they gave up, or because they don't feel they'll get answers, or because they don't care one way or another, that is much harder to deal with. So please see this as a platform for discussion, for dynamic discussion and interaction of any sort. And any question is acceptable. Just go to ChassidusApplied.com. There's a forum. You can write it completely anonymous, completely confidential. Nobody knows where it comes from. And if you do want to share, give an email address because you want a response or you want something specifically sent to you, please do that as well. That website is filled with resources, Chassidic resources, exactly as the name suggests. MyLife, Chassidus Applied, ChassidusApplied.com. That applies Chassidus to our personal, psychological, emotional lives, with many different programs, different classes. I began recently a new class called Tanya Applied, MyLife, Tanya Applied, teaching a half hour each week, going in order from the beginning of Tanya and applying it to our lives. And many other resources. Please take advantage, including all the archives of previous programs, as well as the essays and the creative submissions during our annual MyLife Chassidus Applied essay and creative contest. Okay, so what is the significance of this day? Maybe it's the biggest question of all. So there's two parts to this. One part is a mystery. The mystery of existence itself is the mystery of why God conceals, the mystery of why we need to have sometimes a setback or a situation that seems not positive, and no one really can understand why it has to be that way. God could have done it a different way. So in that sense, there's a certain mystery here, and I'm the first to acknowledge, and I want to say that I don't know. I don't know why Gimmel Tammuz had to happen, just like I don't know why the Holocaust had to happen. But I do know that the fact that it did happen means there must be something lesson for us. And that's the key thing that we have to ask. Perhaps it was meant to bring out our initiative. The Rebbe said, I did everything, now do what you can. What environment is most conducive to do what you can is when you don't see your teacher, your mentor, holding your hand. Even though there's no question the Rebbe is there, but you don't see it. It doesn't have quite the giluyim in the language of Chassidus. So the Rebbe said this, Vayechi Tavshem Gimmel. In other times, why Bikish Yaakov Legalas es HaKetz? Yaakov wanted to reveal the Ketz, which means Ketz HaGolas, Ketz HaGula, when the Mashiach would come, and God concealed it from him. That's what Rashi says in the beginning of Vayechi, based on the Medrash. Why? Because if Jews would know when the Ketz is, there would be some element where they wouldn't completely cry out on their own, because they, in a sense, can expect. So in other words, the concealment, and the Rebbe said similarly, in his Shaina Rabbah, Tov Shemem Daled. Why would God continue this golus? Why is he concealed so much? And he said, the only way to explain it is because then we shrayim it on emes. If there was one glimpse of explanation or hope, you wouldn't cry out with your complete heart and soul, because you'd say, there's a little light at the end of the tunnel. So though in our minds we know there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but emotionally, so you could say perhaps Gimmel Tammuz. That's not an explanation why it happened. After the fact, that's one of the things that may elicit in us and should elicit in us. And it's exactly how I feel, and exactly how I believe all of us should feel. Not less responsible, not, you left us alone. On the contrary, it's a vote of confidence that even as you're an adult and you leave your home, and someone's not holding your hand, you have the strengths and resources to do what you have to do to bring the Mashiach, to spread Chassidus. Personally, I can say, before Gimmel Tammuz, before Chof Zayin Adar, I was basking in Gan Eden, working for the Rebbe, writing Fabrengens, Chazorah, and of course it was a tremendous pleasure and tremendous responsibility and tremendous work. But in many ways the work now is harder, but it creates more responsibility. And I'm more motivated in a certain way, precisely because I know what I was trained to do. I'm only bringing myself as an example, not here to toot my horn or explain what motivates me, but I am saying that as a result of what I've seen, I feel a true obligation and a gift, as a gifted way, in a gift way, not as a burden, to do whatever we can to spread Chassidus. I wouldn't be doing MyLife Chassidus Applied, I wouldn't be doing all the other programs if it were not the case. I could just maintain whatever I was doing back then. But that's not what we were trained to do, to grow. When I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life, it was motivated by that and all the other efforts that I do, just as an example. And you have to do the same, in your own way, with your skills, with your opportunities, with your position, with your sphere of influence. To realize that the Rebbe is working through you, and that you have to rise to the occasion, because you cannot right now say, let me schlep that person to 770. Schlep, I mean in a good way. He'll get $1 from the Rebbe, get a blessing, go to a Fabrengen, go to Yechidus, or whatever it may be. That is not possible right now. So the only thing is that you serve as that person. They tell the story about each of the Masmid, Rabbi Yitzchak Gorevich, who was killed, unfortunately, by the Nazis. The Rebbe took it very much to heart. Him, Chatzafegen, some of the biggest Chassidim. So he was once in Yechidus by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he was asking for a tikkun. A tikkun means somewhat of repair. How can he make up for something that he thought was a transgression, quote unquote? You could imagine. And one of the things they brought up, among others, was that he goes to different cities, and he comes and he's representing the Rebbe, he's raising money, Maimed, or other things, he's coming to teach Chassidus. And often people will come to him for a bracha, seeing him as a representative of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he says he feels that they may think I'm giving them the bracha that's coming from me. And he wants a tikkun that it shouldn't be even that little speck of doubt that people think it's coming from him. The Frierdiker Rebbe smiled and responded to him. He said, "What's Adar? What do you mind what they're thinking? You know it's coming from here. So you're the shliach." Like the Rebbe once told someone else, the Rebbe, the Rebbe answered him for a question he asked. He says, "Katzas yedidim mevinim. Go according to the advice of friends that are experts. So he said to the Rebbe, I want the Rebbe's advice. I don't want friends that are experts. So the Rebbe says, Vos ardir az ich dir empfern durch Yedidim mevinim. Why do you mind that I'll answer you through friends, experts? That's itself what the Rebbe wants. That sometimes it goes through someone. So there's no doubt that we have the strengths given to us by the Moshe Rabbeinu, the neshama klolos of our generation. But at the same time, we were given a job. We could go to sleep, God forbid, or do nothing. So that's the significance of Gimmel Tammuz. That awesome responsibility we carry, each one of us. Think about it. This is what we should be thinking about and making real resolutions around as we come from this 27th year since Gimmel Tammuz Tov Shinun Daled. How could this event happen if a shepherd never forsakes his flock? It is said a shepherd never deserts his flock. It's a true shepherd, lo yazav tzei marise. It's in a letter actually from the Frierdiker Rebbe written after the Istalkus of the Rebbe Rashab on Beis Nissan. Lo yazav tzei marise, he does not forsake his flock, a shepherd. We see Moshe, even one sheep that strayed, he immediately was sensitive and brought it back. So based on that, but yet Gimmel Tammuz happened. Are we allowed to be angry at the Rebbe for abandoning us? Of course I don't really mean that. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just very upset and I miss the Rebbe. I wish he would still walk into 770. Like he used to, and light up his room, and light up the room with his charisma. Well, obviously anger is not the right word, as you said. Is it upsetting, especially when you think about it, as those of us that saw that charisma and that light, that godly light, even on a regular day, let alone on Shabbos and Yom Tov, Rosh Shoshana, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah. So yes, we all have that feeling, anyone who experienced it, anyone who thinks about it a bit. You know, when you see something of that nature, and then suddenly that light is not shining, the sun stops, of course. But we have to say that exactly that, a roya amiti, a true shepherd never forsakes his flock, which means that the Rebbe did not forsake us. Because that statement is a fact. The fact that we don't see the roya, the shepherd, doesn't mean that it's not there. Like the Alter Rebbe explains at the end of Geras HaKedesh, Simach of Zayin, the beer, that it's like a sun that continues to shine even after the sun sets. The son of Moshe Rabbeinu continues to shine to the stars. So the light is there, but we don't see it from the sun, we see it in the stars. So once we know that the shepherd never forsakes us. And how do we see it? We see it when we do our work. When by you sow, you move forward in an unwavering way. You see the strength surging within you. You can even see the direction. Now, there are different ways that people connect. Some people connect, they go to the oil. Some people connect in other manners. The point is that the Reya did not leave and forsake his shepherd. That's a fact. Now, can I prove it? Of course, a skeptic can say, 1 second, I don't see the Rebbe. So the Rebbe, yeah, there were a lot of great Rebbeim. Okay, look, I don't know if I can argue it on a scientific level. It comes down to, again, back to the Vayuso, that there's a certain acceptance of the commitment and the mandate that was given to us. As Rab Shmuel Munkes said to the Alter Rebbe, if you're a Rebbe, there's nothing to be concerned, and if you're not, God forbid, then you deserve the worst. If a person accepts that the Rebbe is the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is sent by God, and the Deir HaShvi is the Nasi HaShvi, and as recently was publicized, a footnote from the Rebbe that he wrote on Chof Ches Sivan, Tov Shinun Aleph, 30 years ago as well, where he wrote that Yesh Lema, that Kol HaNoshim Noshim B'Taf of our generation are Malchus, Asfiras HaMalchus, following Sfiras HaYesod from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So we're all part of Sfiras HaMalchus, of Deir HaShvi, so we continue this mandate. And the Rebbe is working this time through us. So it may not be revealed You may not see the sun, but the stars are shining. That doesn't come from nowhere. They come from somewhere. They're reflecting something. So that's my response to that. And while we may be saddened by the concealment, it has to turn, that sadness cannot remain just a debilitating, demoralizing force. It has to be one that motivates us even more than ever. I remember when the Rebbe had when the Rebbe had his heart attack, Tov Shalom et Ches Shmini Atzeres B'nait. And it was serious times. I was a bocher in 770. And that night, we all thought for sure there'd be a Fabrein the night before HaKofis, the night of Simchas Torah. But there wasn't. But the Rebbe, in classic style, sent a message. So everybody gathered that night when the Rebbe would Fabrein, usually around 9 o'clock, Leil Simchas Torah, which would then be followed by HaKofis, one of the maybe the most powerful Fabrengen of the year. And the Rebbe's message was, that when the seat is empty, that's what reminds you that it's empty. That's what David HaMelech says when he speaks with Yonasan, the Haftarah of Machar Chedesh. David was afraid of Shaul, who was pursuing him, saw him as an enemy. So there was always a Sudas Melech. The king made a meal and a banquet on Erev Chedesh. And David felt he couldn't come because it would have been danger. So then he says, you'll remind him, Yonasan, the son of Shaul, I will be remembered because your seat, Yonasan says to David, when your seat is empty, he'll remember you. So sometimes when someone's sitting in their seat, you can take them for granted. You don't necessarily remember them. When the seat is empty, you suddenly say, 1 second, where is he? And it was explained at the time, like Tzimtzum, Chassidus says, Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is concealment. Tzimtzum b'derech siluk. Not kepshute, but derech siluk. Complete concealment. And yet the whole purpose of it is b'shvil hagilui. The Moshe, the famous example, the father hides from the son, conceals himself, not as an end in itself, but rather as a stepping stone to bring out the ingenuity and creativity of the child to find. And that's how we look at it in that context. Okay, next question. Are there people who believe that nothing happened? Meaning on Gimmel Tammuz. What is the rationale behind some people in the community who say Gimmel Tammuz never happened? If Rebbe isn't at the oil, where do they think he's hiding? Are these people just in denial? Or are there precedents in the Torah for their views, such as where it says Yaakov Avinu lo mes? Yaakov did not die. I miss the Rebbe very much, and part of me wishes they are right, and that Gimmel Tammuz didn't happen. But alas, apparently it did. I'm not here to speak about other people and their beliefs or non-beliefs or whatever it may be. I will say, as a limud zchus, because the statement and the fact that a shepherd never forsakes his flock, so some feel that the shepherd never left. And I just said that myself. The question is what form it manifests. Because at the same time, even when it says Yaakov Avinu lo mes, the Gemara continues. Itaka doesn't say the language mes, that he died, vayomos, but it says, v'chi sabdu sabdayu. Didn't they eulogize him? V'chi kovru kovrayu, didn't they bury him? V'chontu chantayu, didn't they embalm him? Not in that order, but those three things. So the Gemara answers, mazari b'chaim afu b'chaim. Just as his children are alive, same as he was alive. The Gemara doesn't say there was no kfura, there was no burial, and there was no eulogizing, and there was no embalming. It answers. Al pi Torah and halacha, there are rules who decides when something is alive and something's not alive. We're not talking about ruchnis dika living. We're not talking about tzadikim gam b'chayim kruyim mes, tzadikim gam b'misasim kruyim chayim, that even in their deaths they're called alive, and the shoyim, even when they're biologically alive, they're called dead. But these are matters that are not so simple. Elokus there's nothing more than Elokim Chaim, a living God. And yet we don't see godliness. So is he here or is he not here? So this is already a deeper discussion, understanding what is reality, what does it mean that something is here, what does it mean, truth. So there's no question, there's no question the Rebbe is with us. To say Gimmel Tammuz didn't happen as if nothing happened, I have not met a person who comes on that level that will say that Tzimtzum didn't happen because b'shvil hagili. Because the truth is it's a divine power. And it is. The tzimtzum itself is the Shem Elokim, the koyach of the God to conceal himself. Same God that has the power to reveal himself, Hein Hein Gvuresav, also has the power to conceal himself. But still it's called concealment, at least from our perspective. From God's perspective, concealment and revelation are both equally the same. But from our perspective, and that's what matters, our perspective. And therefore what has to translate is into intensifying our work. To say it never happened and make believe like it didn't happen and just everything is normal and usual, then it won't elicit our deeper longing. The point is that the child looks for the father when he's concealed. If he says he's not concealed and everything is like nothing changed, then the whole purpose, then that defeats the whole purpose. So I would not agree with that in any way. You can say nothing changed fundamentally, spiritually, but something changed that has to be a catalyst to motivate us and inspire us to do more. Okay. Mazari b'chaim, afu b'chaim. What was the Rebbe's last major teaching? The last major teaching from the Frierdiker Rebbe, before he passed away, was the Basi Lagani Maimer. To be precise, that was the Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe actually delivered back in 1923. They say when the Rebbe first came to see the Frierdiker, first time that he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe. But it was published as official Maimer of the week of, yes, that Shabbos Yud Shvat. So that would be considered the last Maimer, as the Rebbe many times points out. When the Rebbe took over the leadership, he built upon expounded upon Bas Lagani Maimer every year as the mission statement of his leadership. Correct. And every year the Rebbe would review one of the chapters. So there's no question Bas Lagani is that last major teaching. I don't like the word last, but it's the last B'chaim Chayuse Be'al Medain. My question is this: what was the last major teaching the Rebbe taught before Gimmel Tammuz? And now that we are dependent on ourselves without a physical leader, should we expound upon that teaching and make it the mission statement of our generation? Very good question. So I would like to say, first of all, we're not dependent on ourselves. We have a Grace Eibishter, a Grace Rebbe. However, the point is well taken. You're talking about we don't have it in a revealed way. So what is this last teaching? Well, if you look at the last talks that the Rebbe delivered, Vayakel, Shabbos Parsha Vayakel, Tovshinun Beis would be the last sicha the Rebbe would deliver Leisato before the stroke. So he talks about Geula and about Avos and Vayakel, Avos and Achdus Yisrael. That's the specific theme there. Other details as well. If you look at the last few years, and that's what I would look at, because that you see a consistent theme. So the Basi Lagani of the Rebbe would be exactly what he said in Tavshin Yud Aleph, that this is the Deir HaShvi, and we've now come to the end of the process. And Tavshin Yud Aleph was the beginning of the seventh generation. Now the Rebbe says we've done all the work, and we finished the work, and now you have to do everything you can. So if you want to say the so-called final mandate of the Rebbe to us is to do whatever we can to bring the Geula. And that's what we need to expound upon and learn about, and act upon. Some people refer to the Maimer V'ata Tetzava Memalav that the Rebbe gave out, the last Maimer he gave out. Okay, and there are themes there that can be learned from. Some refer to the last Mugadika Sicha, full Mugadika Sicha, Kisisa Nun Beis, where the Rebbe speaks that this chapter concludes the whole history, the whole process, from beginning, middle, and end. When things are great, then when there's a down, there's a setback, and then when you repair. The Luchas Shoshanas, then the Chet HaEgel, and the Luchas Shnias. Some look at that as being a final statement, so to speak. But however you look at it, it comes down to the theme that the Rebbe always spoke about, the mission of our time. And especially in the last few years of the Rebbe's not Nesias continues, the Rebbe's years, Shama Beguf, Nun Aleph, Tovshim Memtes, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, about the Geula. So following up, someone else asked, what is the most important teaching that Rabbi Schneerson gave? Well, I would focus again on this Geula because everything else channels through that. But the most important teaching is ultimately that you and I are shluchim, that the Eibishter gave you a shlichus that you and only you can accomplish. It's hard to qualify and say it's the only important teaching, but it's a very good place to begin, because if you have that in mind, everything else follows. The idea, the Rebbe was once asked, what is his favorite tefillah, davening? He said, Moida Ani. And we indeed see in Tavshin Chavav Yutas Kislev, 1965, the Rebbe, the classic Kuntres and Yonash Teres Chassidus, which emerged from that, the Rebbe takes Moida Ani and explains how Chassidus illuminates every dimension of Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod in explaining Moida Ani, and then the Yechida that Chassidus adds to it. Moida Ani. So it's a simple prayer for every child. Every one of us understands it. I thank you for returning my neshama to me. But at the same time, it captures the essence. In Hayem Yem, it brings from the Rabbeim that the Nukuda of Moida Ani should be spread throughout the day. Because when you begin the day with that mission, statement, you're declaring and embracing your mission. Moida Ani, I acknowledge that you return nishmosich, shechzarta bi nishmosi. That is the root of everything, because you acknowledge your core soul and how that your soul has a particular mission sent to this time and in this place, and that you're indispensable. When you have that in place, everything else follows. And we were told that the special mission in our time is Deir Ashvi, to bring the Geula, each one of us in our unique way, to be creative, to be innovative, and come up with ways, not Chaz v'Shalom new ways, Derech Yeshara, through Teira Mitzvahs, through Chassidus, Yefutza B'Nesecha Chutza, to the point where you come to a full appreciation, understanding of what Geula is in your life, to personalize it, to envision what Mashiach and Geula will be like in your personal life. Okay, the next question. Why is this year's Gimmel Tammuz any different from the past 26 Gimmel Tammuzes? Well, you could ask that question about anything. Even though Gimmel Tammuz is a certain type of day, you could ask the same question as we say every year, Manishtana Alayla Azeh and Pesach. Why is this Pesach different than last year's Pesach? Every year you ask the same question. Why Shvu is different than all the previous Shvus? So we're told, Chassidus, that every Yom Tov is not just commemorating things that happened, but it's recreating. You're recreating that which happened the first time. Why? Because in Judaism, especially when you learn Kabbalah Chassidus, time is not a line. It's not a river of time. It's not linear. It's a spiral, a cycle. So every year, Rosh Hashanah, the same things that happened the first Rosh Hashanah. Your birthday, it's not just you're remembering your birthday from the past. All that energy repeats itself. That's why the Alter Rebbe explains, why do we count 7 days of the week and then start again from day one? What happens on Sunday? Why not count 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, etc.? Because Yom Rishon recreates the first Yom Rishon. Because the time is every day is energy. The energy of Chesed is on Sunday, the energy of Gvura is on Monday, Shabbos is the energy of Malchus. So when the cycle ends, it starts another, but on a spiral, in another plane. So every year has its particular power. Within the context of whatever the message is. So every year, the Alter Rebbe adds b'chol yom v'yom, every day. But every time it has to be done differently, in a spiritual sense. We say Shema many times a day. Same person has to say it with a different kavanah, based on the circumstances. So, I don't know the mysteries of the year 27 versus the year 26. There are different things in Sfarim about numbers. I'm going to go into that. The Rebbe speaks a lot about these things. But one thing is clear, that even though it happened 26 times before, this is a unique one. And now we believe that this will be the last Gimmel Tammuz in Golus, and we can jump right into the Geula even before next year. Okay. Next question. What can we do differently or better this year in order to honor the Rebbe that we haven't done the past 26 years? I guess that's a continuation of the previous question. And my answer is, like, people will say, well, if you didn't do it last year, what do you make it do? Well, how know you're going to do it this year? Again, you could ask the same question. If you didn't do everything right Rosh Hashanah last year, how do you know you're going to do it this year? We don't think like that. Vayuso, the psychology and the mentality of Vayuso, is you don't say, if you didn't do it so well yesterday, that's what the Yetzer Hara time is. So it tries to cool us down and paralyze us by saying, Who do you think you are? You didn't accomplish it yesterday. You're going to accomplish it today. That's not the derech of Torah and Chassidus. Every moment we are renewed, and every moment we're given new energy. So despite the challenge, don't live in the past and become a victim of the past and say, because, this is the example where a person doesn't have that spunk. What is youth all about? That every day is a new day. I didn't work yesterday. You'll see all people who are successful, it's not because they always are succeeding, but they always have a successful attitude. So even though at the moment there may be a setback, so first of all, that setback itself can be turned into an asset. And secondly, always forging ahead. It didn't work this way, we'll do it that way. That's the positive approach. And that's what the Jewish people are known for. That resilience, that no matter what we went through, we never said, oh, it didn't happen, so let's do it now. Let's not do it now because it didn't happen in the past. No, that's never the attitude. You pick yourself up and say, let me learn from the past, and this time I'm going to do it better. That's the general attitude. So someone to say, it's 30 years since the Rebbe said 2,000% Kent. And look, what were the results? What's the point to continue? Another drop in the bucket, another drop. It didn't happen till now. Why do you think that now it's going to happen? To the point people who say, what are you arrogant? All these big people didn't do it till now. You're going to do it. That's not the way we think. What does the Rambam say? A person has to always envision that the world is equal. And the scales are equal. Zachius and the opposite. The merits and the opposite of merits. And one good word, one good thought, one good action, machriya, tips the scales and brings tshuva v'atzalah, brings personal and global redemption. That's the attitude. I'll say, 1 second, it didn't happen yesterday. That's not how we think. And as the Alter Rebbe said, that Bilam said, Arenu v'loy ata. I see it, but not now. No, it's always now that it's possible. It's not like it will happen, or if it didn't happen, it's not going to happen. That forging ahead. Next question. Did the Rebbe leave a will at Tzavah? Some say the Rebbe had a will, was found in a safe after Gimmel Tammuz, and what did it say? So, to be very direct and honest, I don't know. Some say there was, some say there wasn't, some say we know there was versions that were not signed, some say it was signed. I'm not going to come and give any final verdict. I don't have first eyewitness or anyone that I heard directly for sure that this is the way it is. It's riddled and shrouded in all kinds of mysteries for whatever reason. What we do know, however, is that Mitzvah Shabbos Truma, Tovshim Mem Ches, which was right after Chof Beishvat, the Rebbe spoke a sicha, which sounds very much like a tzavah, which was shook us all up. The Rebbe spoke about Nachshe b'cheshbeinu shel. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe asked a number of times for us to prepare the sicha for editing. Nobody had the gall, the ability to do it. Which, for right or for wrong, we didn't do it. And there the Rebbe said that when there'll be a shaila, what to do, and that's when he appointed the Rabbonim, Chassidus Rabbonim in each community. If it's matters of refuah, the Rebbe said, go to doctors. And the Rebbe spelled out different questions that can come up and how to address them. And if it's something you don't have an answer, to go to the local Chassidus Rabbonim in the community. You can look it up, Mitzvah Shabbos Trum B'Tovshim Mem Ches, it's recorded. It was a very difficult sicha to hear, but in retrospect, the Rebbe was speaking about a situation like that. That didn't mean that the Rebbe was saying it's going to happen. But the Rebbe said you have to prepare. So that's it. We do have there was a secular, well, I'm going to say there was a Hebrew, there was a legal will, but there the Rebbe doesn't speak about, he speaks about his personal property, that also go over to Agudas Chassidic Chabad, which was of course consistent with Hey Tevis, the verdict that everything that a Rebbe is, the Rebbe Alein belonged to Chassidim. So the Rebbe, his house and his personal belongings, would go over to Agudas Chassidic Chabad, which answers the question that was also asked, another question. Let me just read it. What was done with the Rebbe's personal property after Gimmel Tammuz? What happened to the Rebbe's house on President Street after Gimmel Tammuz? So both of those, the answer is it went over to Agudas Chassidic Chabad, And from time to time, special days, the Rebbe's house is open for davening and for learning. And that's essentially the answer to that. Okay. Which only demonstrates even more how a Rebbe is part of Chassidim. Chassidim live on, the Rebbe lives on. The Rebbe's property, very property, is part of Chassidim. What was the Rebbe's condition between Chof Zayin Adar and Gimmel Tammuz? Okay. Initially, I didn't know if I was going to address this question, but as I said, I tried to address, people have that on their minds, so how could we not address it? When the Rebbe was recovering from the stroke, which is after Chof Zayin Adar, 1992, for a few months he would come out to this balcony in the back of 770. But it wasn't entirely clear to a simpleton like me what the Rebbe's state was and condition. Rabbi Jacobson, can you please relate some stories of the Rebbe that occurred during those months that can show that the Rebbe was completely in control? Thank you. Well, the people did write questions. The Rebbe would respond with using his head, nodding or saying no. There was the story with the hurricane in I think, Andrew in Florida. The Rebbe said to not evacuate, told the Chabad Shluchim and the people there. And there were things that people considered to be miracles. I mean, these are stories that are documented, and you can ask the people that are around. I am not a doctor, and neither do I want to be, and neither do, even if I was, I wouldn't be Parkinsech and trying to figure out the Rebbe's condition. It's not my job. It's between God and the Rebbe, and if they need doctors, bring doctors in to do what they have to do. I don't think Chassidim, it's their role to go and deal with that issue at all. If anything, to help make sure you get professionals. Suffice it with that. I don't want to go further into it. Things were not all done quite the way it should have been done. And as a chassid, I feel just like Is Yechi HaMelech mistaper, that you don't look at a king when he's taking a haircut. Even though he's taking a haircut, we saw the Rebbe, a barber go into the Rebbe's room and come out, and you saw the Rebbe had a haircut. But still, you don't see a king taking a haircut and doing other things. Because Zamelech, Tifarte, and there's an union of Hadras Melech and Koved HaMelech, and some things that we have to stay with. So if it's only a haircut, imagine going into the Rebbe's medical condition, what his heart is like, what his mind is like, what is this? It's not in my domain. And though I always say I'll answer questions, but I also have the right. Certain questions I don't want to go to because it's not my area of expertise, and I'm not even interested. The Eibishter, I know the Rebbe's a shliach of the Eibishter, and the Eibishter takes care of him. Hopefully the Chassidim and the people around the Rebbe will do everything possible to make sure that that is held up in the greatest way, and that's what I would say about this topic. Okay. Now, next question. Well, I will say one more thing. One thing we do know, however, is that Chof Zayin Adar was 11 months to the day from Chof Ches Nissan, where the Rebbe said, Tutals v'sekent, I did everything. So if you want to talk about Chof Zayin Adar, maybe talk about you and I. Not about what's going on. I'm not worried about the Rebbe. I'm worried about us. Are we understanding the message? And then 2 years later to the day of Chof Zayin Adar was what? A second stroke. Which should have, and probably did shake up all of us. It shook me up. That's when I actually made the decision to write Torah Meaningful Life. And then a few months later was Gimmel Tammuz. So instead of trying to figure out in the Rebbe's inyanim, we have to figure out what does it mean to us, going back to the message of Vayisol. What does it mean to you and to I? So in that context, who decided to take the Rebbe to the hospital after the second stroke? Again, a question I'd rather not address, but since someone asked it, I'm reading it, and I'm saying that I don't want to address it. That guf is the Shivre B'Tzidei. Because we know the Rebbe said to the secretaries they didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave 770 to go to the hospital. That was the case in 1977 when the Rebbe had the heart attack, Shmini Atzeres. So if so, who made the decision to bring him to the hospital after the second stroke? And especially we know after the first stroke, and Chof Zayin Adar, the Rebbe stayed in 770. So here I can't answer that question. I don't know who made the decision. To justify it, I would say, look, the doctors, everyone had said this is now desperate, so that's why they did it. That would be the most likely reason. The Rebbe didn't want earlier, so you could argue, should the Rebbe stay because of that? Or should we do whatever we know b'derech hateva, since you couldn't ask the Rebbe? And the Rebbetzin was also not here to ask as it was in Tafshin Lamed Ches. So that's all I'm going to really say about that. What else can I say? Okay, next question. Did the Rebbe make any public statements alluding that Gimmel Tammuz would happen and what he wanted us to do afterward? Was it alluded to in the 28th Nissan, the Chof Ches Nissan sicha? But another person writes in this context, Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I love your Sunday Night Torah broadcast. Thank you and keep up the good work. In your opinion, in retrospect, do you think the Rebbe's speech on Chof Ches Nissan, where he said, I've done all I can, now it's up to you to bring Mashiach, was the Rebbe foreshadowing that Gimmel Tammuz would happen? Are there any other hints or clues on that speech that implied the Rebbe felt the health of his physical body was declining? Okay. Well, on one hand, I working in the sichas at the time, did not see that the Rebbe alluding to a Gimmel Tammuz. Yes, he spoke the Mitzvah Shabbos through sicha about Cheshbein Shalelam, Bova Nachshav Bel Cheshbein Shalelam. But that is, al pitayda, you prepare. Story of the Tzemach Tzedek that he cited there. The Chof Ches Nissan, you could say no. The Rebbe said the Gula didn't come yet. What else can be done? I've done everything I can, so the only thing to do is to give it to you. Purim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe said the same thing, and Purim Mem Zayin you're talking about is 5 years before the stroke, and 7 years before, or 8 years even, before Gimmel Tammuz. So I don't know if you can read it. In retrospect, when you go back, you could say now, with Gimmel Tammuz and all of it, not that the Rebbe necessarily meant it, but maybe, we didn't do what we had to do. The Rebbe said, you do whatever you can, and Gimmel Tammuz now fortified that, if you wish. That's the most you can really say. To know what was in the Rebbe's mind, who would know? The Rebbe firmly believed the Gula would come, and if the Gula would come, would have all the brachas, and wouldn't have to go through Gimmel Tammuz. It was clear from all the sichas that it wasn't like, okay, in case it doesn't happen. The Rebbe never spoke of that language. It was a definite. That's why it was so shocking to so many. And it still remains shocking. So I would stay away from alluding to, even though the Frierdiker Rebbe, yes, there was the remez of the Yud and the other things that the Frierdiker Rebbe did. Can you, in retrospect, start looking for different signs? That's always the case. But to my understanding, the Rebbe was guiding us and leading us toward the Geula and said, let's do everything we can. And that was the driving force. And there was no plan B. At the same time, our Rebbe does prepare for all circumstances, and there's no question the Rebbe left us all the resources we need, even after a Gimmel Tammuz. So that's how I would phrase the response to that question. Is Yechi HaMelech a salute people give to a leader during the last stages of life? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, as we approach Gimmel Tammuz, I've been reflecting on the final years of the Rebbe's physical life, in which Chassidim sang Yechi, and I'm reminded of the first Yechi HaMelech mentioned in Tanakh that the Rebbe referred to, Beis Nissan Memches, as King David lay on his deathbed. In this statement, one of the sadness that those close to a passing leader say or sing in order to comfort. Is this the statement that one in sadness and those close to a passing leader say or sing in order to comfort the leader in his final moments and to comfort themselves as he passes on? If I recall correctly, that's not the purpose. The purpose is actually to help him heal, and to give him strength. Yechi HaMelech, to give him strength to be able to overcome any challenges. That was how it was understood in Beis Nissan. That was also how it was understood afterwards. There was a call to help strengthen the Rebbe to get through the challenge of Chof Zayin Adar. How others interpret it, I don't know, and how it's used today, everyone has their own interpretation. But these are human interpretations. We're talking about Torah interpretation. Yes, you strengthen a Rebbe, you strengthen a Melech by saying Yechi HaMelech in that sense, like the story with David HaMelech, and I referred you to the source, Beis Nissan Tov Shem Memches. Is there a reason the community didn't appoint an eighth Rebbe to the Chabad dynasty? Did the Rebbe prohibit the community from doing so? Rebbes are not appointed by human beings, they're appointed by God. Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen by the Eibishter. And it doesn't matter what the people think, whether they like or don't like him. These are not up to elections, it's not a democracy. Same thing with Mashiach, and same thing with the Rebbe. After the stalkers of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe was there. It wasn't that people went for us. It was there. God sent him. Had God not sent him, God forbid, what would have been? Would they find someone? I mean, as an administrator, or are you talking about as a Rebbe? The fact of the matter is, the Eibishter wants to send someone. He knew how to send Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov, when the time was necessary. So it's not a question whether we want or not want. It's a question whether the Eibishter wants. And it could very well be, Der Ashvi is the last generation of Golus, and therefore there is no eighth. But it's not up to us. It's up to God. Some people can say, well, why don't you, as an administrator, we need someone to be a figurehead. But those that know what a Rebbe is not a figurehead, and he's not a CEO, and he's not an administrator or a fundraiser. A Rebbe is a Ish Alikim. Ish Alikim means it's godly. So yes, you can have a mentor, you could have a Rav, you could have a Mashpia, but a Rebbe is a Rebbe. And that again is not in our domain. Now you'll say, what happens if God did send someone? If God sent someone, I'm sure he would make sure that people understand that he's sending it. But that did not happen, and so on. Now, if somebody has a candidate, again, it has to be something that's divine and godly. Okay. And finally, one more question. Why don't we have a public fast day on Gimmel Tammuz to exhibit our sadness? Well, first of all, fast days are designated by the Torah and by Alpi Torah. You don't just come and make fast days. There's no fast day designated for the Holocaust because Tisha B'Av and other sad fast days include the Holocaust, as explained in many different places. I've spoken about this a number of times. Just like the different holidays represent not just that holiday, but other forms of redemption and salvation. Secondly, sadness. When the Torah says make a tainus, it's sadness in order to awaken, as the Rambam writes, the hearts of people, that they're not insensitive and that they look and soul search and in introspection to look at what they can do to repair their actions. Sadness is not an end in itself, as we spoke earlier. Sadness is a catalyst for growth. And that's what Gimmel Tammuz is, a catalyst for growth, and that's what it should be. Okay. So I've covered it from many different angles. I believe I addressed many different questions, and there were many more, but I hope this suffices. I will do is go now to Parsha Chukas, and it's also connected. Remember, Gimmel Tammuz Tavshin Nun Daled, 27 years ago, was Motzoi Shabbos Parsha Keirach, and Yom Rishon of Parshas Chukas. Similar to what we say about Chav Dalet Tevis was Motzoi Shabbos Parsha Shmois, writes at Tzemach Tzedek, and early Yom Rishon Parshas Ve'era. And the Rebbe explains the connection to both. So Keirach, we spoke about last week, Keirach challenged the very concept of a Rebbe, Madua Tisnasu, Kol Ha'ed G'deshim Hem, which is what Gimmel Tammuz does, challenges the very concept of a Rebbe, and then the answer is, no, the Rebbe is with us, the Rebbe is here, we need a Rebbe. Chukas addresses the issue of death. Pirud Neshama Maguf, when the guf and a soul and body separate. That's Tumas Mes. Beginning, how do you heal? How do you purify from the impurity, from the toxins of death? To the point that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, even though Hashem was showing him how you purify from Tumas Zav and Tumas Nida and Tumas Mitzera, and so on, came to Tumas Mes. It says, Neskarkim upon of Shalmesha. The Medrash of this week's Parsha. Moshe's face turned white, turned pale. Different interpretations of Neskarkim, but he was disturbed. What will purify? What will heal from the impurity and toxic energy of death? Well, Moshe didn't know that the Eibishter, just as he gives, he takes. Just as he takes, he gives. The Eibishter, just like he takes a neshama, could also give us the tools of how to heal. And just as there were a tada for all other impurities, there's not one for this. What disturbed him? And the Rebbe spoke about it, the Shleishim of the Rebbe Tzchayim Mushkit, Pasha Kisiso Tovshim Emches. And he said, Moshe Rabbeinu knew what it says in Chassidus and in Torah. Yiri de Tzedech Aliyah, and the neshama lives on. And he knew what it says in all these Mamorim. And yet he was disturbed. Until the Eibishter pointed, Marabetz Boy V'Imer Zeh Zois Chukas HaTorah. This, the Parah Aduma, the red heifer. And that, so to speak, was a response. So the Rebbe answered, because all the biurim, all the explanations of Chassidus, they're all cerebral, they're all cognitive explanations. But when the heart sees death, it's broken. Because at the end of the day, for 1 second, there's a rega kotna zavticha, even 1 second, that a neshama, a nefesh alekis, a neshama, a godly neshama is separated from a body, that's extremely disturbing. Atem adveikim b'Hashem alekechem chaim kulchem hayem. There's a dveikus, there's a connection. So Moshe, yeah, all the biurim are nice, but personally, he took it personally, with empathy. And that was Bamete Torosi. So what was the Ataka Eibishter's answer? And what does Chassidus say? How does the red heifer, the Pora Aduma heal? So the Alter Rebbe, of course, it's a Chukas Shakakti, Zeder Gezarti. It's a Chukah. It's the classic Chukah that we don't have an answer for. Why would a red heifer, the ashes and the fire and the ashes and the water, and Zarakti, and then spraying the water on someone who touched a mess, encountered a death, why would that heal? What's the connection? So though it's taka chukah, but like the Rambam says, wherever we can try to explain, we explain. And the Alter Rebbe explains in Parsha Chukas, this week's Parsha L'Kutei Torah, that the source of life is rotzei and shuv. Like in the heartbeat, contraction, expansion, like in the breath, exhale, inhale. That's where life comes from, rotzei and shuv. That's the way God made it, that the energy flows, and then it returns to its source and flows again. A constant process, a pulse, a pulsating energy. Rotzei v'shuv. The Pora Aduma is rotzei and shuv, it's eish and mayim. They burn the Pora, they take the ashes, the Eifer HaPora, mix it with water, mayim chayim, so it's gvura and chesed, rotzei and shuv. Fire is like rotzei, it reaches up, water goes down, rotzei and shuv, and that creates resurrection in a way, renews life. Now, until Mashiach comes and Tchis HaMeisim, it won't be in a physical sense. But from the point of view, someone who is touched by the separation of rotzei v'shuv, the way you have to bring back rotzei v'shuv through the Pora Aduma. So Naveda means, as he explains, that rotzei is the passions where a person yearns for God passionately and burns away all the excess of the animal soul, the koyach, the taivus of the animal soul, but leaves Eifer. Because the koyach ha-mesaved, the power to desire, even bad desires, the power to desire is just trapped in the bad desires. But you can separate, like when you burn something, not everything disappears, only the ash remains. That's the power of desire. Which is, as he says, you say, Dose Bahari Kedesh. That's rooted in a very high level. The problem is it got trapped and being held hostage by the action of desire, by the object, when you desire something inappropriate. Not al pitera, the power of desire is now actively involved in that. So the fire separates. Now you're left just with the power of desire. You mix it with water, mayim chayim, mayim from Torah, and there you have a renewed, you've stripped the negative desires of their manifestation. You reach to the root of it in the power of desire in the Eifer, you mix it with water, and now you direct it toward the desire and passion toward godliness. That's what brings life, because ultimately life and death is not just physical, it's also spiritual. I mentioned before, tzaddikim, even in their deaths, even misosam, kruim chayim. Rishoim, even in their lifetimes, they're called Rishoim, gambe chayim, likroim mesim. They're called death. Why? They're physically alive, because it's more than life is not just medical and physical. It's like chayes soda. When do you see she's really alive? After her passing, and you see her impact. Because real life is not just you walking around and breathing and talking and walking and so on. Real life is bringing godly life into this world that lives on forever. Mazare b'chaim, afu b'chaim. So when a person is indulging in material things which are temporary and impermanent and are all subject to decay and erosion and death, so they're involved in dead things basically. That's what Gashmias is. But that's what the Eibishter wanted to make a Did the Rebbe and to introduce real life. What's real life? When you do something neshamadik, something from Torah, Torah's chayim, neshama b'chayim. True life is godly life. So when you introduce purpose into the world, into your life, and you do things directed toward real eternal life, you become a channel for eternal life. So the Parah Adoma represents all of that. A healthy Rotzi V'Shuv to counter the hefsek, hachayim, that comes through being involved in indulging in gashmis. What a Rosh is, Roshayim Gam B'Chayim, Kriyim Mesim. Because they're physically alive, but they're not connected to true life, eternal life. People make money, they eat, they indulge in other things. All these things are temporary, they all will die. So we know, even if it's not dead yet, it's in a dying process. That Rabbeinu Bechai writes, Tinuk Mishanel Maskil Yisyavish. A child, when he's born, he's all vibrant. He's already beginning to decay, to dry up. Why? Because you don't begin to age when you're 80, you begin to age when you're day one. It just takes time for it to be obvious. Because if you didn't have day one and day two, and if you didn't have 70 years, 80 years behind you, you wouldn't be 80. However, human beings can deceive themselves into thinking, I don't see it decaying, I don't see it eroding, so it's all strong, all powerful. We feel invulnerable. But the truth is, nothing in this material world is invulnerable because it's all subject to erosion and all subject to impermanence, except if you infuse it with something nitzchizdik. If you become a channel for something that is eternal, then you become something eternal. When you use your body, your physical being, your physical actions, for something that's an eternal purpose, you take a coin, instead of just indulging, which is temporary, you give it to someone. That kindness lives on forever. Yichud zeh nitzchi, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Forever, Leilam, but forever. We may not see it right away, but it's forever. The kindness you did to that person will never die. Even if you're not here anymore. Even if the money is not here, but the kindness remains. And the same thing with any mitzvah. Every good deed introduces nitzchias, which is eternity, in a temporary and mortal world. We're introducing immortality, eternity, into a mortal and limited world. That's the kavanah. To bring bligvul into gvul. The infinite into the finite, and even beyond the infinite into the finite. That's the ultimate purpose. Parah Aduma encapsulates that. So yes, though we cry over the death, but we know we also have the hope that there'll be the Rotzi V'Shuv that will reunite Neshama B'Guf. And that's also the context, the connection to Gimmel Tammuz. Taka Gimmel Tammuz B'Gottlieb was a hefsek, at least Leinei Basar, at least to our eyes of flesh and blood. Mitzvah Shabbos Keirach challenged the idea of a Rebbe. Comes Chukas and says, 1 second, there's Tara, there's a purification, there's a tikkun even for this horrible tumas mess. Even that tumah, that impurity, that toxin, that Moshe Rabbeinu trembled and was disturbed. Because Zeis Chukas HaTeira. God's saying, here, Zeis, I am showing it to you. That's why God had to show it. Because you don't come to this on your own. This has to be a godly power. It's not something we can figure out on our own. You need only God who gives life and takes life. And only God who knows the mysteries of life and death. And neshama and guf and how they function can give the power of Mechayim Mesim, both Beruchnis and Begashmis. So that is the connection to Gimmel Tammuz. Another question about Pasha Chukas. Why was it a sin for Moshe to hit the rock? So let's read it inside. Nowhere in the 613 commandments does it say, thou shalt not hit rocks. Hi, if I was responsible for the welfare of hundreds of thousands of people in the desert, I would hit, kick, bite, or slam rocks if I thought it would give the people I cared about enough water to drink to survive. Therefore, what Moshe did was an act of Avos Yisrael, and he should have been rewarded, not punished. We also are taught by the rabbis that in a time of emergency, we can violate the rules of the Torah, except for the bad three of murder, adultery, and idolatry, in order to save someone's life. Kal v'chemer when thousands can die of thirst without water. So even if God gave Moshe a temporary command to speak to a rock, the lack of water emergency should have provided Moshe a valid reason not to follow the command. Therefore, Moshe is not guilty of doing anything wrong, and I feel his punishment of not being able to enter Israel was unjust. Okay, I don't know who you are, but you know what? I mean, good. So you can bring God to a din Torah, and with your argument here. But remember, God has the final say. So it's an excellent question. I never heard of it quite posed that way. However, there's a few things that I have to keep in mind. It's true that if Hashem said nothing, Moshe should do everything possible to help the Jews. Speak to a rock, hit a rock, whatever it takes. Correct. Totally agreed. But here, the story was that the first time Hashem told Moshe to speak to the rock. Now he told him, the first time he told him to hit the rock, Now he's telling him to speak to the rock. Moshe did, and he didn't see water come out of it. So that's why he hit the rock, because he remembered Hashem said to hit the rock. But remember, let's be honest here. It's the equal miracle to get water out of a rock, whether you hit it or you speak to it. Try it out. Try it out at home. Bring a rock, and first try to speak to it. You won't get any water. I can assure you. Unless it has water in it or something. We're talking about a real rock. Then try to hit it, and you can also not get water. So frankly, both are an act of amunah. Because rocks don't give water. Water doesn't come from rocks. So you could ask a better question. He didn't even do something, who's going to... If Moshe said, what are you talking about? God. Since when do you speak or hit a rock and I get water? You want water, you go to a brook. You get rain. Just like Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Send the maim, make shamim, send rain from heaven. Or tal, whatever. Moshe didn't say that. So you could say it's an act of amunah. But here was the point. This was not an issue about saving the Jews with water. This was the issue of Moshe's abiding by the Eibishter's words. The big chil Hashem here was this. If anyone else had hit the rock, it would have been considered a mitzvah, because you know what? As I said, it's an act of amunah to think that a rock can give water. What the problem is, it's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's standard. And everyone's looking at Moshe, and he changed. Like in Akilu, he had a stickle suffix that maybe he should hit it and not speak to it, even though everyone heard that he should speak to the rock. That goes chil. Chil Hashem has nothing to do with the act, it has to do with who's doing it. The Gemara talks about Rabbi Chia not wanting to take meat on credit from a butcher. What's wrong? Everybody does things on credit. He'll pay him later, because he may be seen going away from the butcher with the meat, and people will say, oh, he didn't pay. That's not true, but it's not a sign. People see it that way. The Rebbe once said in a Fabrengen, connected to this, he brought this as a proof. He said the Friedrich Rebbe, when he was offered to leave for his prison, so he said, it was Thursday. And they said to him, you go by train. He said, when will the train come? They'll say, after Shabbos. It means he had to be on the train for Shabbos. Now, Pi Halacha, so the Friedrich Rebbe said no. Al Pi Halacha, first of all, Pekuach Nefesh. So you can go on a train even on Shabbos, if it's Pekuach Nefesh. Secondly, even if not, he's leaving on Thursday. He's already on the train. Up-Din, he's allowed to be on the train. But the Friedrich Rebbe knew that people are watching him. He's a Rebbe. And the Bolsheviks, especially the Forsakes, wanted to show that you see your big Rebbe, when it comes to himself, he's only driving on Shabbos. Even though it's Al Pi Halacha and everything would have been allowed. But because it was the Rebbe, so he did not want even one suffix. In other words, when you're on that level, even shifting from the Eibush to saying, speak to the rock, to hit the rock, and not doing that, from a level of Moshe, that was grave sin. Because then, as the Rebbe always says, that you look at your mashpia, and if he doesn't do something, you could say, you know what, I can do double not something. Basically, the mashpia has to always do double good, because someone looking at him says, if he's on that level, then I can do half of that. So he has to do double. When you're talking about a Moshe Rabbeinu, even one shift, how would the Jews interpret it? You know what, I could also do a shift. Look at Moshe. Famous story about the different people tell the story different ways. This person who was a masmi used to learn 22 hours every day. Barely slept. He got older. His family said to him, you're already older man, rest a little more. You learn 20 hours a day. 21 hours was 22. So his answer was, if I go from 22 to 21, so someone in another city who goes to daven every morning, shachris, with a minyan, is not going to go. And someone only goes once a week to davening, won't go. And someone in America who goes once a year, Yom Kippur to shul, won't stop going. In other words, it's like a ripple effect. His one little shift on his level will affect everyone to the point that it could become a very big effect. So this is the story. Moshe had complete amunah that the Jews are not dying from starvation or from thirst. First of all, he saw what happened till that point, that Eibishter provided. So this was not an issue where Moshe thought if he doesn't hit the rock, the Jews. He was looking to achieve what the Eibishter wants. But that was the shift. So the question is an excellent question, and that's the answer. One final question, which I'm looking at time-wise. I don't know if I have the time to go over right now. Well, I'll just say it briefly. The question about Nachash and Necheshes in this week's Parsha, that Moshe put up a copper snake, and that led to healing. So some ask the question, we see that today in medical, the medical symbol is a snake around a rod. That does originate from the Torah. And the concept is that a Nachash is the source of Sam, right? The Zuma, the Sam HaMovis, the serpent in the Gan Eden, he poisoned Adam, Achava and Adam. So when you want to heal, real healing comes from transforming poison into healing. You see the idea of antibiotics, or even or other forms of alternative medicine, which uses that concept that takes the illness itself and turns it into a form of healing. So that's symbolism. I'll try to talk about more in a coming program, but due to time, I'm going to stop with that. Okay. Homeopathy is the word I was going to look for. That homeopathy is very much based on that concept. So now, the Chassidus question, how does the red heifer heal from death, I addressed. Let me conclude with essays. So even though it's a special Gimmel Tammuz edition, but what more nachas does the Rebbe have when he sees people applying Chassidus to contemporary challenges and issues? So here we have it. So there's 4 tracks. We're on the 26th place winners. The essay in English, Loving the World Like We Love Ourselves. Shoshana Gottlieb. Age 25, King's Cross Clinic, receptionist in Sydney, Australia. Beautiful essay about sensitivity to the environment. If you really want environmentalism, learn Chassidus. It's a very good essay on that topic. The creative essay is Light, the series, several paintings by Rivka Einav, age 27, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, taking the principles of light and Torah, and Chassidus, and expressing in terms of Neir Shabbos, Neir Chanukah, how light is so powerful in a very beautiful series of images. The essay in Hebrew, Men, Etzem HaNeshama בחיים שלנו, taking the concept of Etzem HaNeshama and addressing it in our lives where we have so many different challenges, by Menachem Mendel Schneerson, student at Nes Tzionah, Israel. And the essay in Hebrew, Women, Seichel Regesh Masha Beineim, the mind, the heart, and that which, and the feelings, and that's which is between them. Riki Lerner, student Kfar Chabad Israel, and Chassidus takes the mind, the heart, the emotions, self-control, and the ideas that Chassidus talk about all of this. So these essays, the creative and the essay in English, can be seen at ChassidusApplied.com. The Hebrew essays, both men and women, can be seen at diralo.org, diralo.org. And with that, we conclude this special edition of MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 358, special edition Gimmel Tammuz. May we do our part and finish the last remnants of what the Rebbe gave us the mandate in the schus of Gimmel Tammuz. No doubt that the Rebbe, with the Eibishter behind him, will do their part and will be zeichet to the Gula Mitis Vashlema and see how Gimmel Tammuz, like the Gimmel Tammuz of the Friedrich Rebbe, becomes a Schalta de Gula, the full Gula Mitis Vashlema. Everyone will be well and healthy. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. MyLife Chassidus Applied. Thank you very much.
This program is brought to you by MyLife, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at ChassidusApplied.com/donate.